Hello, and welcome to the second episode of Unscripted History, which will be covering early Russia, from the founding of the first Russian state in the 800s up until around the middle of the 13th century. Now, I know that it has been a rather long time since the last episode of this, but life kind of got in the way. I will try to upload more this summer, but I make no promises. Now, Russia, as of the recent decades, has had a rather controversial and difficult history. But that is unfortunately nothing new. Russia has always been like that, even before it was Russia. Before Russia really became Russia and something resembling what we know today, it was made up of mostly Slavic, Finnic, and Turkic tribes. The Slavs, as in the tribe of the Slavs, not the ethnicity, the Finns and the Bulgars. The earliest of the Slavic states started appearing in the 800 CE, the first of which was Great Moravia, which is located in modern-day Bohemia in the Czech Republic. This was the first time that the Slavs actually had their own state, and they weren't just a roving band of just tribespeople. And Great Moravia, though it was the first, was certainly not the last. Poland would follow suit around 900 CE. And Poland, like Russia, has had a very difficult history, but that's for another time. However, the most important one, for this video at least, will be Kievan Rus, which was founded in the later 800 CE, and it's part of modern-day Russia, Ukraine, Poland, Finland, Latvia, Lithuania, Belarus, and small parts of Slovakia, Moldova, and Romania, which just goes to show that Slavs back then, just as they are now, were everywhere in Eastern Europe. However, the Kievan state would last the longest out of the three I mentioned, the other two being Great Moravia and Poland. Well, Poland obviously being around today, but I'm talking about early Poland when it still had its independence and was its own kingdom. The Kievan state would last until the arrival of the Mongol hordes in the 1240s, with the balance of power unfortunately leaving Kiev long before that, and the power eventually being concentrated in the city of Vladimir, and eventually in the modern capital of Moscow. Now, what exactly happened with the Kievan Rus? Who were some of the important figures? Well, the key figure was a Viking, a Swedish Viking by the name of Rurik. Like I mentioned, he was a Swedish Viking, and he came to power in Novgorod. He actually is responsible for the founding of the city. Him and a few of his brothers were traveling in the area when local Slavic tribesmen asked him and his brothers, "Hey, we are sick and tired of having to constantly fight everyone around us. Would you like to come and be our leader?" And Rurik accepted, and he was the first member of the Rurikid dynasty, or the dynasty of Rurik, which would rule Russia and Kievan Rus and the smaller Russian states until the death of Ivan IV, better known as Ivan the Terrible, in the year 1584. So that's almost 700 years of uninterrupted Rurikid rule. However, after Rurik died, a relative of his, it's unknown exactly how he was related, just that he was, named Oleg the Seer, would be the next Rurikid ruler. And unlike Rurik, instead of ruling from Novgorod, Oleg was the first ruler from Kiev, which gives the territory its name, Kievan Rus. He's the one who set Kievan Rus up for greatness, and he is speculated to be the brother-in-law of Rurik, even though, as I mentioned before, historians just aren't sure. Something else that Oleg did, and why he's remembered, is that he, at least once, attacked the Byzantine Empire and their capital of Constantinople. Moving on, Saint Olga of Kiev is a famous Kievan Rus ruler, and a venerated saint in the Eastern Orthodox Church. She's famous for her punishments of the Drevlians. They killed her husband, and in turn she did everything she could to destroy them. The full story can be found basically anywhere, but I would look to the Russian Chronicle for the full version. After her death, she was canonized as a saint in the Eastern Orthodox Church, and she was the first non-pagan Kievan ruler who actually tried to spread Christianity in Kievan Rus. But it would be Saint Vladimir, Vladimir the First, also Vladimir the Great, who is known for officially Christianizing the Kievan Rus. Note that Christianizing here is in quotations. Even though he baptized everyone in the city of Kiev, most people in Kievan Rus remained pagan for many centuries. There's still pagan influences today in the local festivals in Russia, Ukraine, and other Baltic nations. And it is important to note that Vladimir is Olga's grandson. Olga's son, Vladimir's father, was actually a pagan, unlike his mother and son, but Vladimir was a Christian. He was actually responsible for bringing Christianity to Russia. He had to make a choice between Christianity, and by Christianity I mean either Roman Catholicism or Eastern Orthodoxy, even though at the same time they were still on paper the same church. They just had different rituals, different rites, different everything really. Judaism and Islam. And the reason he chose Eastern Orthodoxy is because with Islam he would have been able to keep a lot of his multiple wives, but he would have had to get rid of alcohol, which, if the Russian stereotypes are true, was something he would have never have done. He refused Roman Catholicism because, though they were a very close contender with Eastern Orthodoxy simply had more glory to offer. Upon seeing Constantinople's wealth and power, that's why he decided on Eastern Orthodoxy over Roman Catholicism. And Vladimir refused to convert to Judaism because he described Judaism as a religion who had no homeland. They had lost their homeland first to the Christians, and then to Islam after the First Arabic Caliphate rose to power. But that is what Vladimir the Great is known for, and he is a canonized saint in the Eastern Orthodox Church, Saint Vladimir. He's known for Christianizing Kievan Rus. The next of the great leaders of Kievan Rus was Yaroslav the Wise. His rule was fairly long, fairly prosperous. He actually had to reclaim the throne from his brother. His brother was a cruel and tyrannical leader. Yaroslav actually conquered Kievan Rus from his brother in a coup with aid from Vikings from Norway. Why he's important because he introduced the first set of laws, actual code of laws, in Kievan Rus. That instead of being traditional, it was an actual system of laws. Next we have Vladimir II and Vladimir Monomach, which is Vladimir the monarch, basically. He steered Kiev away from a more tribal system of government towards a more feudal and monarchical system, towards a more traditional monarchy. Now we're going to jump ahead a few centuries from Vladimir Monomach, who ruled in the city of Vladimir. Kiev had already started losing its grandeur at the time, to Alexander Nevsky, who ruled during the early years of the Mongol invasion in the early 1240s. He is also a saint, Saint Alexander Nevsky. He is a very influential figure in Russian history, and here's why. While the Mongols were pushing down on him from the east, he had to hold off German crusaders in the west and Swedish invaders in the north, while negotiating with the Mongols. He is most well known for the battle on the ice in 1242. It was a crushing defeat for the Teutonic Knights, the crusading force from Germany, what is now Germany anyway. Heavy armor was actually a downfall of the Knights. It broke through the ice. Alexander Nevsky, like I said, he lured them out onto the ice of Lake Peipus, where the heavy armor of the German knights was eventually responsible for their downfall. They broke through the ice, and the Russians were able to slaughter them. In addition, Alexander Nevsky was an excellent political leader, and he set up the lands of Novgorod, Vladimir, and Kiev for success in the centuries to come. And in the last few centuries, in the century before the Mongols, and until Moscow rose in the 1400s, there's a period known as appanage Russia. The appanage system worked very similarly to feudalism, where primogeniture granted the land, the firstborn son would get land. However, with Russian appanage system, what would happen is, if, say, brothers were still alive, they would get their own little chunks of land. So you would eventually have the land, instead of being one unified territory, be split up between all of these princes, with one larger territory being the most powerful, somewhere like Kiev, for example. And this system was largely in place after Kiev's fall from grace in the 1100s until, like I said, the rise of Moscow, or as it was back then, Muscovy, in the 1400s. But that is a little too late for this video. But right at the end of the period I want to talk about, and this is perhaps one of the more influential bits, this is why Russia actually started expanding and becoming the power that it is. It was the Mongol invasions. The northern kingdoms, the Republic of Novgorod, the Republic of Pskov later on, even though Pskov wouldn't break off from Novgorod until 1348, the northern kingdoms were too far north for the Mongols to even consider, which was obviously very beneficial for these lands. But the southern kingdoms, places like Kiev and Moscow, Vladimir, they fought against the Mongols, but they were absolutely curb stomped because they had no unifying force. And this obviously led to many territories becoming Mongol tributaries, with Moscow being the most important. And the reason Moscow was so important was because it was in a relatively central location, so it was easier for the Mongols to have the leader of Moscow, the Grand Prince, rule Moscow and be basically their tax collector for all of the provinces around it that were tributary states of the Mongols. And here's a little glimpse of what would come with Kievan, between the lands that are now Russia and the Mongols. Remember, Kievan Rus isn't really a thing anymore. It's controlled by the Golden Horde, or tributary states of the Golden Horde. In 1380, a legendary battle is fought. There is a legendary, even though there are documents about it, documents surviving. We know this battle occurred. And this is the Battle of Kulikovo, fought in 1380. Now, the Battle of Kulikovo is very important because not only did it see the first Russian victory over the Mongols and the Golden Horde specifically, but it also saw the rise of Moscow to a more prominent role, with Prince Dmitry Donskoy. Prince Dmitry, this battle was fought on the Don River, hence why Prince Dmitry got the name Dmitry Donskoy, actually winning. It's the beginning of the end of the Golden Horde's influence in Russia. After this, the Golden Horde would very quickly start to lose all the influence they held over the Russian lands, and with Moscow taking over more territory and becoming its own independent kingdom. And there are two rulers that help accomplish this. Ivan Kalita, or Ivan the First, his name meaning Ivan the Moneybag. He ruled in the early mid-1300s, several decades before the Battle of Kulikovo. What he did, and why he is so important and nicknamed the Moneybag, he made a deal with the Mongols that would maintain Muscovy as a Mongol tributary, meaning that Moscow would remain independent to a certain extent, but have to pay a yearly tribute to the Mongols. And like I said earlier, because of Ivan Khalita, the Muscovite rulers would become the main tax collectors for the Mongols and the Golden Horde. Um, Ivan got his name the Moneybag because of the wealth he acquired in this role, obviously by skimming a little bit from what he was supposed to give to the Mongols. And to finish this video, I'm going to talk about Ivan III, who is a couple generations, who is the grandfather, I believe, of Ivan the Terrible. Ivan III ruled in the late 1400s, about a century before Ivan the Terrible would die. He is actually responsible for the rapid expansion of Muscovy, which is now known as Moscow. It is because of, with the groundwork laid by Ivan Khalita, Ivan III was able to make use of this massive treasury to greatly expand the territory and influence of Moscow. And it is largely because of Ivan III that we have Russia as we know it today. And yes, later rulers would greatly expand on the territory, like Peter the Great, cementing Russia as a Baltic power and expanding further into Siberia. But it was the reforms of Ivan III and the rapid expansion under his rule that really allowed Russia to become what it is today. Unfortunately, I don't have a reading list for this video. I'm sorry for that. I'm unsure as to what I'm going to cover next, so stay tuned, I guess. Thank you for listening. This has been the second episode of Unscripted History. Goodbye.